Throughout the poem of the Man God, there are various events, incidents, dialogues, scenes which give us reason to believe that this work is authentic and not the product of Maria Valtorta's imagination. One such scene takes place on Holy Saturday, the day after the crucifixion of Jesus and the day before his resurrection from the dead. It concerns a dialogue between the Blessed Virgin Mary and Mary Clopas. And it's about her reminiscences concerning her marriage to Alphaeus. Now, who is Mary Clopas? We're getting a little bit of information from the New Testament, but Maria Valtorta makes it absolutely clear, fleshes the entire thing out. Mary Clopas was married to Alphaeus. Alphaeus was the blood brother of Saint Joseph, who was obviously the husband of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Mary Clopas and Alphaeus had 4 children: James, Joseph, Judas and Simon. So these 4 could be called brothers of Jesus, and they are in the New Testament so called. But in fact, they have no blood relationship to Jesus, and they're not children of the Blessed Virgin Mary. They are cousins of Jesus by legal relationship, because of course Joseph, although he's the brother of Alphaeus, is not the natural father of Jesus. The dialogue between the Blessed Virgin Mary and Mary Alphaeus, I'll describe that in a moment, but first I want to quote from a website, BibleStudyTools.com, which gives us an explanation about ancient Jewish marriage procedures. Jewish marriage included a number of steps. First, betrothal, which involved the prospective groom's travelling from his father's house to the home of the prospective bride, paying the purchase price and thus establishing the marriage covenant. The second step, the groom's returning to his father's house, which meant remaining separate from his bride for 12 months, during which time he prepared the living accommodations for his wife in his father's house. The third step, the groom's coming for his bride at a time not known exactly to her. Fourth step, his return with her to the groom's father's house to consummate the marriage and to celebrate the wedding feast for the next 7 days, during which the bride remained closeted in her bridal chamber. One can see how elaborate this is. It is very different from the Western way of marriage, very different from Catholic marriage. And it's, in particular for my purposes, to note, very different from mid-20th century Italian marriage procedures, with which Maria Valtorta, and only with which, would she have been familiar. It's almost certain that she would not have known anything of ancient Jewish marriage procedures. And yet, the poem of the Man God displays an uncanny and accurate understanding of these procedures. We find that dialogue that I mentioned between her and the Blessed Virgin, between Mary Clopas and the Blessed Virgin, in chapter 611 of the poem, entitled The Night of Holy Saturday. The Blessed Virgin Mary speaks. Mary, did you love your Alphaeus very much when you were his virgin bride? Mary Clopas replies, O Mary, I rejoiced at dawn, saying, another night has gone by, one less to wait. I rejoiced at sunset, saying, another day is over. Nearer is my entrance into his house. And as the sun set, I used to sing like a skylark, thinking, he will soon be here. And when I saw him come, looking as handsome as my Judas, that is why Judas is my favourite, but with the eyes of a deer in love like my James, oh, then I no longer knew where I was. And when he greeted me saying, my sweet bride, I was able to say to him, my Lord. Then I think that if at that moment I'd been crushed by a heavy cart or struck by an arrow, I would have felt no pain. And later, when I became his wife, Mary is lost in the ecstasy of recollections. Now, I've read the poem of the Man Gods 3, maybe 4 times. So this will be the 3rd or 4th time I read that passage. In the first 2 or 3 times, I just passed over it because it is right in the context of monumental events. Marie Valtorta has described the crucifixion of Jesus in great and harrowing detail and the period leading up to the crucifixion. She's described all the anguish from the time of Jesus' period on the cross, through to the entombment, through to the return to the supper room and being ensconced there, and all the terrible feelings that have been generated by the events of the Friday. And then comes the glorious resurrection of the Sunday and all the events attendant upon that. So this little conversation can be very easily passed over. But it tells us something extremely interesting. It shows that Mary Klopas is accurately describing what actually marriages were like, or the marriage procedure was like 2,000 years ago. We find at the beginning of this conversation, Mary initiates Mary Klopas, thinking about her marriage, by saying, do you remember when you were his virgin bride? And instead of Mary Klopas then talking about the period when she was a wife and leading life in the household of Alphaeus, she talks about all the period before that, or a lot of the period before that, when she was waiting for him, and then he came, and then she ends up going to his house, of course, and is then becomes his wife. So why would she do this? Well, this would be strange for us, but perfectly proper if one looks at what was said in that quotation from the Bible Studies Tool website. At that point, as the Virgin Bride, she is betrothed to Alphaeus. The payment has been made to the father of Mary Klopas, and so she is now effectively the bride of Alphaeus, but he's gone away for that 12-month period. So she's in a position of waiting for him. And that's why she goes into this reverie about the period before they're living together. When Mary, the Blessed Virgin, talks about her as being the Virgin Bride, that's exactly the sort of thing that Mary Klopas would think about the period before she lives with Alphaeus. Then we have the statement about the groom that she's waiting for. She's waiting night after night. So she knows that he's going to be coming soon. But this must be near the end of that 12-month period. It's very unlikely she would have known at the beginning of the 12-month period, or even halfway through, because the groom has returned to his father's house to start building the accommodation in which they would live. And it's not going to be till near the end of that building project. He's going to know exactly when it's going to be ready and when he can therefore go and get his bride and bring her back to live with him. So her awareness of his coming will only arise near the end of this 12-month period. And even then, that's only the day that she'll know. She's not necessarily going to know the hour. And you can tell from the way she talks that she says, as the sun set, I used to sing like a skylark thinking, he'll soon be here. So it's sometime after sunset. And this brings in the other very, very interesting point, which is easy to overlook. She's waiting day after day. But then, when the sun set, she knew that he would be coming sometime soon after the sunset. This agrees with what is known about ancient Jewish wedding ritual. The groom would come not in the daytime to collect his bride, it would always be at night, often around midnight, and he would come with a train of his fellows with burning lanterns to collect the bride. So this passing comment that she says he'll soon be here at the sunset, she says that affirms the veracity of Maria Valtorta's writings just in that part. It's also to be noted, just going back really to the first thing I was saying, that she says, and later, when I became his wife. There's clearly then a difference of status prior to the consummation, albeit after the marriage has been contracted, and the point where she's in the house and they've perhaps consummated their marriage. So we have a time period that passes after Alphaeus has arrived, and she says later, when I was his wife. And this supports what was said in the Bible Studies tools and other websites and other books, that she would be taken by Alphaeus from her house, from her father's house, to his father's house. Thus, later, she becomes his wife. All this suggests that the conversation between the Blessed Virgin Mary and Mary Clopas is entirely authentic. It certainly draws upon information which would not be ordinarily available to anybody other than someone who has got an interest in ancient Jewish marriage practices. Could be a very scholarly priest, but not Maria Valtorta herself. And as I've said before, it's very unlikely that there will be a conspiracy with a very scholarly priest to insert this very cleverly crafted dialogue into the text, almost as an aside when all these other momentous events are happening around. This was Italy in the post-war period, the immediate post-war period, when Italy was struggling. It's 1945. People haven't got time to mess about, engaging in conspiracies, to produce documents, to sell to who? Nobody has any money. Everybody wants to find food and shelter where they've been bombed out. So we have here a small dialogue, but yet of great moment, because it gives us evidence of the truth of the poem of the man God. Stay tuned for the next video, which is connected, but in a way not obvious, to this video. It concerns a very contentious scripture passage that occurs in the Synoptic Gospels. More will be revealed on the next video.